Hello everyone. Today we're wrapping up the telekinesis tutorial with grabbing and throwing our enemy character. This works much like an object, but there's several tricks that need to be employed to work with a mesh and capsule. So if you didn't see part 2 or somehow part 1, I have the blueprints linked in the description for anyone to use for free, so you can download it and follow along if you only care about the character stuff we're doing now. Additionally, after the enemy character lands, they'll be able to get back up by playing a montage. However, I won't be going into too much detail on that as it's really worth its own tutorial. That being said, let's start. So this is part 3, however we only really need to worry about part 1, as I'm going to be building this with throwing our enemy actor instead of our object. So we can disconnect the F to grab and drop our object, as well as our left button click, and we can combine them later, but just for the sake of neatness, this video is only going to focus on grabbing and throwing an actor. For this tutorial, I'm specifically going to be using the impulse files, as we're going to be grabbing and throwing our actor using add impulse, just as we did for the object. Grabbing a character model is going to be very similar to how we grab an object. So when we press F, we're going to get a branch. We're going to start a timer as we did with the object, but we'll come back to this condition when we set it. In part 1, we've gone through selecting our throwable enemy, now that we can finally make use out of it. When we bring the character to hand, we want to set its movement mode to none. We don't want to worry about the capsule component, so we're going to set it to be query only. No physics collision, that way it doesn't interact with the map at all. Then we're going to get the mesh. And this is where we want to simulate physics. However, we can't just get simulate physics as we've done with our object, because when we do that, we're going to detach the mesh from the capsule component. So we need to effectively simulate everything except for one bone, so we can set all bodies below simulate physics. We'll uncheck include self, check new simulate, and the in-bone name, we'll just make a literal name. And this is going to be the pelvis. Now an important note, when we check the mesh and we open up the skeletal mesh asset, when we say below a point, it means everything that is under the pelvis, not from head to toe. Just so you're aware, if you wanted to change this to better match what you would want to do, you might have to change the hierarchy of the bones. But after we set these simulate physics, then we're going to set our timer. And create a custom event. We call it move enemy to hand. And much like our object timer, get it set to be 0.01 seconds and then looping. And we'll want to promote this return value to a variable. And we'll call it the enemy hold timer. This whole timer is going to work exactly like how we set up in the first video for our move object to hand. So we're just going to copy the majority of it up to this primed portion. And then we'll paste it below. We'll get rid of our throwable object and replace it with our throwable enemy. Convert it to a validated get. If it's valid, we'll set the actor location. Get rid of the throwable object under the get actor location. Replace it with throwable enemy. And in our distance check, replace the other object with our get distance 2. So for our custom event, we'll rename it Reset Enemy Priming. We're going to reuse the primed variable to signify that our actor is close enough to our scene component. And off of true, for our branch after set actor location, we're going to drop the enemy, which I'm just going to make a placeholder custom event for that. We'll just call it drop enemy. And now that we have our primed, we'll go back to our first branch. And we're going to get an AND bool. The first condition that we're going to check is to see if we are not primed. We'll just duplicate the not. We're going to get our throwable enemy and check to see if the mesh is simulating physics. Because if we throw it, just like how we threw an object, we're going to set primed to be false, so then we could grab it again. But if the object is still simulating physics, it's going to cause quite a few errors when we try to change anything down the line grabbing it again. So we want to make sure that both of these checks are met before proceeding. And if they aren't, when we press F, we're just going to drop our enemy. When we drop our enemy, the first thing we're going to do is cancel and invalidate this enemy hold timer. Then we're going to take primed and set it to be false. After that, we'll get our throwable enemy. We'll get its mesh. And then simply stating set simulate physics. And making sure that it is unchecked. Then usually the enemy is going to be in the air. So we're going to copy our movement mode and our set collision enabled. We'll set movement mode to falling. And set our capsule component to collision enabled again. Then we'll take our object grabbed. And we'll set it to be false, so then we can select another actor. And then we need to call our reset enemy priming. And now we're mostly done with grabbing our actor. I just realized an object grabbed. After we get our branch, we want to make sure that that is set to true. So now when we test this out, press F, we bring the actor to our hand. And just like our object, it will collide. If we get too far, it'll drop it. It keeps the mesh with the capsule component and resets it back to normal when we drop it. Now we'll move on to throwing the actor. Off of our mouse click, I'm going to set a branch. And we're going to check to see if the enemy hold timer is valid, meaning that it's running. And also if our target is primed. This is just to check to see if we're holding our enemy. If you wanted to add another branch after this to check to see if we're holding an object, you can use the object hold timer instead. If you're only worrying about throwing one actor, you could just put primed. So we're going to again take the enemy hold timer and clear and invalidate the timer by handle. So we're no longer holding it. But this time when we throw the mesh, we want to make sure that it's simulating all physics. So just like we did with BP enemy, we want to use this set all bodies simulate physics. Though do note, you'll have to be careful if you have an enemy wielding objects. But we're not going to worry about that for this tutorial. So now we're going to take the mesh and we're going to add an impulse. To just say the velocity change to be checked. And we're going to throw them in the direction of where our camera is looking. So we'll take the follow camera, get its forward vector, and then multiply it. And I want to throw it pretty hard. So going to say 20,000. Then after we throw the actor, we want to set it into a state of ragdoll. So we're going to make an event in our enemy to do that. And we're also going to set that event in our interface first. So we're going to add the function. We're just going to call it ragdoll actor. We're not going to have an input or output. We're just going to go into our enemy, double click ragdoll actor to create the event. And then our third person character, we'll take our throwable enemy. We'll call ragdoll actor. And then just like we did with our drop enemy, we want to set the primed, object grabbed, and reset priming. So we'll make a new variable for us to ragdoll, and we'll just call it ragdoll. And off of our ragdoll actor, we're going to set it to be true. Now, depending on how hard you throw the actor, we can either do this next step on tick, or we can make a timer. I'm just going to do tick since it's guaranteed that this is going to work. How we're going to keep the capsule and the mesh aligned is for us to do a trace from the mesh to the capsule and update it as it moves. So when we do this on tick, we're just going to do a check to see if ragdoll is true. And if ragdoll is true, we need to check to see if our enemy actor is moving. So we're going to get the mesh. It's going to be flying until it reaches a complete stop. So we can get physics linear velocity. For the bone name, we'll get the pelvis. The return value will get the vector length. And we'll check to see if it's less than 3. Or some other similarly small number. But because we're throwing this from a state of rest, if we're just throwing it when we're idle, the velocity may come up as 0 at the start, so we're going to get a delay off of our true. We can keep it at 0.2. Then we get another branch, and we're just going to check again. So make 2 custom events. The first one is going to be update capsule location. And the other is going to be called Ragdoll Done. Off of our true branch, we'll call Ragdoll Done. And off of false, for both of our branches, we'll call the update capsule location. The capsule location will get a line trace by channel. Then we'll drag in our mesh and get socket location, with the socket name being the pelvis. We'll have that be the start position. Then we'll subtract 100 from the Z value so it's pointing straight down. And that'll be our end position. Then we'll take the out hit and break it. And we're going to promote the location to a variable. And we'll rename it mesh location. Connect it to our true. Otherwise, we'll duplicate it to the false. And we're going to copy our get mesh and socket location and update that. Then off of either one of these, we're going to take the capsule component and set the world location. And we're going to add a value to the mesh location because we want to make sure that we are adjusted for the size of our mesh. So if we look at the mesh, we see the location is minus 89 from our transform. We just need to add 89 instead. The reason we do it like this rather than just setting the socket location plus the offset as our world location of the capsule is because there's been a few instances where I've tested this out where the actor has played the montage we'll set up in a second, but clipped through various objects. So I found this as a workaround to fix that issue. Then when our ragdoll is done, we'll take ragdoll and set it to be false. Then on the mesh, we'll set all bodies, simulate physics, and leave it unchecked. We need to reattach the capsule component, so we'll attach component to component. With the parent being the capsule component. Then for the location, we want to snap to target. Same thing with the rotation. Then we'll set the relative transform. Split the transform, and we want to input the values that we have here for our location, rotation, and scale default. We're going to play a montage. And one of the montages that was in the download, again, the link is in the description, is this getting up montage. And I just put one montage notify in it, which is called up. We just connect the mesh to it. This will play an animation for getting it up. You can add a switch on name and just connect it to the notify begin and interrupted if you want to do anything after this point. What you do here, I leave open-ended for you. Maybe you want to wait until the actor gets fully up before we take the capsule component and set its collision to be enabled, because that was still not done yet. And one last thing to do. We'll copy our throwable enemy, convert it to a validated get. Then we'll take our object and do the same thing. We're going to set up 2 custom events. The first is going to be grab character. The next is going to be grab object. Now we should be able to grab both our objects and our characters and drop either one. We could sort of do the same thing with our timers. So the enemy hold timer is valid. Cut out the middleman. Make a custom event. Throw actor. Throw enemy. Another custom event to throw our object. So that's all. You're now able to grab and throw anything with that interface, have it deal damage, and adjust it as you see fit. So special shout outs again to the pillars of the community for their continued support: Winterberry Shark, Francesco Poda, and K Panic, and for everyone else who has supported me thus far on the channel. As always, I ask that you like the video if you liked the video, and subscribe if you want to see more projects like this in the future, or if you want to keep updated on what I'm going to be doing this year. If you would like the completed blueprint component, you can do so by joining Patreon, where you can have access to just about everything else that I've done, cleaned up, annotated, and put into a blueprint component just to drag and drop into your own project. Or join the Discord, pop in and say hi, or maybe even show off your own work to a growing community of other indie developers. But that's all I have for you today, so thank you all for watching, and as always, I hope you've been inspired.